The sound of grinding metal echoed through the vast maintenance hangar at Naval Air Station Pensacola as 22-year-old Jessica Chin adjusted the microscopic calibration on a radar component smaller than her thumbnail. Her steady hands moved with surgical precision, threading copper wire no thicker than human hair through circuits that would guide million-dollar aircraft safely through storms and combat zones. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across her workstation, but Jessica's focus never wavered. Each connection had to be perfect. Lives depended on it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Around her, the hangar buzzed with activity. Mechanics shouted over pneumatic tools. Pilots strutted past in flight suits discussing mission parameters, and officers barked orders about deployment schedules. But Jessica remained invisible to all of them, hunched over her workbench in a corner that most people forgot existed. She was Civilian Contractor number 4847, a title that meant less than nothing to the men and women who flew the planes she helped keep airborne. Her supervisor, a gruff former Navy technician named Bill Morrison, rarely spoke to her beyond grunted approvals or complaints about productivity quotas. To him, Jessica was just another pair of hands capable of soldering components too delicate for the regular maintenance crews. She earned $14 an hour working on technology worth more than most people's houses, but nobody questioned whether she understood the broader implications of her work. They assumed she didn't. They were wrong. Jessica had grown up in San Francisco's Chinatown, the daughter of immigrants who ran a small electronics repair shop. Her father, David Chun, had been an electrical engineer in Taiwan before moving to America, where his credentials meant nothing and language barriers forced him into manual labor. But at home, surrounded by broken televisions, radios, and early computers, he taught his daughter everything he knew about circuits, frequencies, and the invisible forces that make modern technology possible. By age 10, Jessica could repair circuit boards that stumped technicians with decades of experience. By 15, she was designing her own radio transmitters and building computers from salvaged parts. Her high school physics teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had encouraged her to apply for engineering scholarships, insisting that Jessica's intuitive understanding of electromagnetic principles surpassed students she'd taught at MIT. But scholarship applications required time Jessica didn't have. Her father's health had declined rapidly during her senior year, forcing him to close the repair shop. Her mother, Linda, spoke limited English and cleaned office buildings at night to keep food on the table. Jessica took the first job she could find after graduation, precision electronics assembly at a defense contractor, and moved the family to Florida when the Navy contract offered better pay. Now, 3 years later, she worked in anonymity among some of the most advanced military technology on Earth. The pilots who depended on the radar systems she assembled had no idea that the quiet Asian girl in the corner possessed an engineering mind that could reverse engineer their aircraft's entire navigation suite given enough time. They saw her ethnicity, her gender, her youth, and her civilian badge, and dismissed her as thoroughly as if she were invisible. Jessica preferred it that way. Invisibility provided safety, and safety meant stability for her family. Her father's medical bills from his ongoing treatment for emphysema consumed most of her paycheck, but the work itself fascinated her. Every day brought new challenges, components that wouldn't interface properly, frequency calibrations that demanded mathematical precision, electromagnetic interference patterns that required creative solutions. She developed her own techniques for problems the engineering manuals couldn't solve. When standard oscilloscope readings proved inadequate for detecting minute signal variations, she learned to identify component failures by the subtle changes in electromagnetic hum that others couldn't even hear. Her hands could detect temperature variations in circuit boards that indicated impending failures hours Before diagnostic equipment registered problems, the precision required for her work had become second nature. Jessica could thread wires through components while carrying on conversations, her muscle memory guiding connections with mathematical accuracy. She understood tolerances measured in thousandths of inches, frequency variations counted in kilohertz, and timing sequences calibrated to nanoseconds. Every movement was deliberate, every adjustment calculated, every decision informed by years of accumulated knowledge that nobody had bothered to recognize. Her workstation reflected this precision. Tools arranged in perfect geometric patterns, components sorted by specifications she'd memorized, and documentation organized according to systems she'd developed independently. Other technicians' workbenches looked chaotic compared to Jessica's methodical setup, but her productivity numbers consistently exceeded department averages by significant margins. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell occasionally walked through the maintenance areas during her facility inspections, but she'd never spoken directly to Jessica. The base's operations officer had more pressing concerns than individual contractors, though she sometimes paused to observe the electronic assembly process. Jessica would sense the officer's presence and maintain her focus, knowing that acknowledgement might invite unwanted attention or scrutiny. The work environment suited Jessica's temperament. She'd learned early that speaking up often led to complications, particularly as one of the few women and minorities in the technical sections. Her suggestions about process improvements had been dismissed or credited to supervisors in previous jobs. Her insights about potential equipment failures had been ignored until those failures occurred exactly as she'd predicted. Eventually, she'd stopped offering opinions and concentrated on executing her assignments with flawless precision. But Jessica's mind never stopped analyzing the larger systems she helped maintain. She understood the tactical implications of the radar modifications she performed, recognizing how frequency adjustments could enhance target acquisition in specific weather conditions or geographic regions. She could predict which aircraft configurations would experience interference problems based on the electromagnetic signatures of their installed systems. During lunch breaks, while other contractors gathered in the cafeteria, Jessica often walked along the flight line, observing aircraft operations with the same analytical intensity she applied to circuit boards. She noticed patterns in maintenance schedules, correlations between equipment failures and environmental factors, and inefficiencies in operational procedures that could potentially compromise mission effectiveness. Her observations remained private, recorded in notebooks she kept at home rather than in official reports that might expose her understanding of classified systems. Jessica had learned to compartmentalize her knowledge, displaying only the technical competence necessary to perform her assigned duties while concealing the deeper comprehension that might threaten her anonymity. The irony wasn't lost on her. She worked among warriors trained for combat, officers educated at prestigious military academies, and pilots selected for their exceptional skills and judgment. Yet none of them suspected that the quiet contractor adjusting their navigation systems possessed theoretical knowledge and practical abilities that could revolutionize their operational capabilities. Jessica's precision extended beyond her technical work into every aspect of her life. She arrived at the base exactly 15 minutes early each morning, completed her assignments within time frames she calculated to demonstrate competence without appearing threatening, and maintained professional relationships that were cordial but not personal. She'd learned to navigate institutional hierarchies with the same mathematical precision she applied to circuit analysis. Her invisibility provided unexpected advantages. Positioned at her workstation, Jessica overheard conversations about operational challenges, equipment limitations, and tactical concerns that officers discussed freely in her presence. They spoke as if she weren't there, revealing information about mission parameters, deployment schedules, and strategic priorities that she gradually compiled into a comprehensive understanding of the base's operational environment. This information remained unused, filed away in Jessica's analytical mind alongside technical specifications and performance data. She had no outlet for her insights, no mechanism for contributing to discussions about improvements or innovations. Her role was strictly limited to executing specific technical tasks according to predetermined procedures. But understanding continued to accumulate, precision continued to develop, and capabilities continued to expand, even as Jessica remained fundamentally invisible to the military community surrounding her. She was building expertise that would prove invaluable when circumstances eventually demanded more than routine technical competence. The stage was set for transformation. Though neither Jessica nor anyone else at Naval Air Station, Pensacola, could have predicted the events that would soon shatter her comfortable anonymity and thrust her into situations where precision meant the difference between life and death. Morning fog rolled across Pensacola Bay as Jessica arrived for another day that would change everything, though she had no way of knowing it yet. The base hummed with unusual energy helicopters circled overhead in training formations, and convoys of unmarked vehicles had been arriving since dawn. Something significant was happening, but as always, contractors weren't briefed on operational details. Jessica settled into her workstation and began examining a damaged targeting computer that had been salvaged from a training exercise gone wrong. The unit's outer casing bore scorch marks, and several components had been sheared completely off the main board. Most technicians would have written it off as unsalvageable, but Jessica saw possibilities where others saw destruction. She powered up her diagnostic equipment and began tracing signal pathways through the damaged circuitry. Her oscilloscope revealed patterns that told a story. This wasn't random battle damage, but the result of a precisely timed electromagnetic pulse that had disrupted specific frequency ranges while leaving others intact. Jessica frowned, recognizing the signature of advanced electronic warfare, technology that shouldn't have been part of any routine training exercise. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez appeared at her workstation, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and looking more stressed than usual. Rodriguez was one of the few supervisors who occasionally acknowledged Jessica's existence, though their interactions remained strictly professional. "Chun, how long will it take to get that targeting system operational?" he asked, gesturing toward the damaged unit. Jessica examined the component more carefully, mentally calculating replacement parts and calibration time. 72 hours if I can source compatible processors from inventory. 48 if you can approve requisitions for upgraded components that would actually improve performance beyond original specifications. Rodriguez paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "You're talking about improvements? This is salvage work. The original design had inefficiencies in the signal processing algorithms," Jessica explained, her voice steady despite discussing classified technology. "The damage actually exposed opportunities to reroute certain pathways through higher capacity channels. The replacement would be more resilient against electronic countermeasures." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The chief set down his coffee and studied Jessica with new attention. "How do you know about the original design specifications?" Jessica realized she'd revealed more knowledge than appropriate for her pay grade. "I've worked on similar systems. Pattern recognition becomes automatic after a while." What she didn't mention was the stack of technical manuals she'd acquired through legitimate channels and studied at home, or the fact that she'd reverse-engineered the logical architecture of dozens of military systems during her 3 years at the base. Her supervisor's clearance level wasn't high enough to access the information Jessica had independently deduced through careful observation and analysis. Rodriguez made a note on his clipboard. "Get it done in 48. I'll approve whatever parts you need." As he walked away, Jessica wondered why the timeline had suddenly become critical. She'd learned to read the base's operational rhythms, and today felt different. The urgency in Rodriguez's voice, the unusual aircraft activity, and the presence of unfamiliar personnel suggested something beyond routine training. She began disassembling the targeting computer with methodical precision, photographing each stage of the process for reassembly reference. The damage patterns became clearer as she worked. Someone had tested advanced jamming technology against this system, probably to identify vulnerabilities before actual deployment. The implications troubled her. Modern electronic warfare had evolved beyond simple signal jamming into sophisticated attacks that could turn friendly systems against their operators. If someone was testing countermeasures against American targeting systems, they were preparing for conflicts that went far beyond the routine peacekeeping operations typically discussed in public. Jessica's analysis was interrupted by commotion. Near the hangar's main entrance, a group of personnel she didn't recognize were setting up equipment that looked like mobile command stations. Their uniforms bore insignia she couldn't identify from a distance, but their movements suggested special operations rather than regular Navy. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell appeared with the newcomers, engaged in serious discussion while gesturing toward various sections of the maintenance facility. Jessica caught fragments of their conversation over the ambient noise references to insertion points, communication blackouts, and electronic signatures. One of the visitors, a tall man with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, pointed directly toward Jessica's workstation. She quickly returned her attention to the targeting computer, but continued listening as their footsteps approached. "That's our best electronic specialist," she heard Rodriguez explaining. "Civilian contractor, but her work is exceptional. Never missed a deadline, never had a failure in the field." "Background clearance?" the stranger asked. "Standard contractor. Vetting, but she's been here 3 years without incident. Handles classified systems daily." Jessica's hands remained steady as she continued working, but her mind raced. They were discussing her as if she weren't present, evaluating her suitability for something beyond routine maintenance. The targeting computer suddenly seemed less important than understanding why special operations personnel were interested in her capabilities. The group moved away, but Jessica noticed Lieutenant Commander Mitchell glancing back in her direction. The officer's expression was thoughtful, as if reassessing something she'd previously overlooked. Jessica spent the next hour sourcing replacement components from various supply bins throughout the hangar. The process allowed her to observe the unusual activity more closely. The visiting personnel were establishing what appeared to be a temporary operations center, complete with encrypted communication equipment and tactical displays showing regional maps. She recognized some of the geographic markers from her father's stories about his military service in Taiwan. These weren't training scenarios. The maps showed real-world locations where American forces might need sophisticated electronic capabilities under hostile conditions, while retrieving a specific processor chip from a secure storage area. Jessica overheard 2 technicians discussing equipment failures that had occurred during recent overseas operations. Electronic countermeasures had apparently neutralized several targeting systems similar to the one she was repairing, leaving aircraft vulnerable at critical moments. 3 different theaters, same failure pattern, one technician explained to his colleague. "Someone's figured out our frequency protocols and developed jamming technology specifically designed to exploit them." "What's the solution?" the other asked. "That's what those special ops guys are here to figure out. Word is they need systems that can adapt in real time, maybe even counter-jam the jammers." Jessica's mind immediately began processing the technical requirements for such capabilities. Real-time frequency adaptation would require sophisticated signal analysis, automated decision-making algorithms, and hardware capable of rapid reconfiguration. The targeting computer she was repairing contained some of those elements, but implementing true adaptive countermeasures would demand innovations beyond current military specifications. She returned to her workstation with a new understanding of why her work had suddenly become critical. The damaged unit wasn't just another training casualty. It was a test case for developing countermeasures against emerging threats. Her repair work was actually contributing to the development of next-generation electronic warfare capabilities. Jessica began approaching the restoration with different priorities. Instead of simply returning the system to original specifications, she started implementing the improvements she'd mentioned to Rodriguez. Her modifications would create adaptive pathways that could automatically reroute around jammed frequencies, essentially turning electronic attacks into triggers for enhanced performance. The work required delicate recalibration of multiple subsystems. Simultaneously, Jessica's hands moved with practiced precision, but her mind operated on a different level entirely. She was essentially redesigning military technology in real time, creating capabilities that didn't exist in any official documentation. By mid-afternoon, the targeting computer had been transformed into something significantly more advanced than its original configuration. Jessica's modifications included redundant processing channels, frequency-agile transceivers, and adaptive algorithms that could learn from attack patterns and develop countermeasures automatically. She powered up the modified system and began running diagnostic tests. The performance parameters exceeded original specifications by substantial margins, but more importantly, the system demonstrated resilience against simulated electronic attacks that would have crippled the standard configuration. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell appeared at Jessica's workstation as she completed the final calibration sequence. The officer observed the testing process with obvious interest, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed more knowledge of electronic warfare than Jessica had expected. "These performance improvements," Mitchell said, studying the diagnostic readouts, "they're not documented in any of our technical manuals." "No, ma'am," Jessica replied carefully. "They're logical extensions of existing capabilities, implemented using available components in ways that optimize system resilience." "You developed these modifications independently?" "Yes, ma'am." The damage pattern suggested specific vulnerabilities that could be addressed through alternative circuit architectures. Mitchell made notes on a tablet, then looked directly at Jessica with unmistakable evaluation in her expression. "How long would it take you to implement similar improvements across our entire inventory of targeting systems?" Jessica calculated. Quickly, considering parts availability, testing requirements, and the complexity of scaling her modifications across different hardware configurations. Assuming adequate resources and access to relevant systems, approximately 6 weeks for complete fleet modification. Less time if we focus on units scheduled for immediate deployment. The lieutenant commander nodded slowly, then walked away, without further comment. But Jessica noticed her speaking urgently into a radio, using terminology that suggested direct communication with the special operations personnel. Something had shifted in Jessica's status, though she couldn't yet understand the full implications. Her technical capabilities were no longer invisible. They'd been noticed, evaluated, and apparently deemed valuable enough to warrant attention from personnel whose missions extended far beyond routine base operations. The targeting computer sat on her workbench, its enhanced capabilities representing innovations that could potentially save lives in combat situations she could barely imagine. Jessica had spent years working in anonymity, perfecting skills that nobody bothered to recognize. Now suddenly, those skills had become strategically important, but recognition brought complications. Invisibility had provided safety and predictability. Whatever was happening now would demand capabilities she'd never been asked to demonstrate. In situations where precision meant more than just technical accuracy, Jessica carefully secured the modified targeting computer and began organizing her tools for the next day's work. But she suspected that tomorrow would bring challenges that had nothing to do with routine electronics repair and everything to due with the hidden depths of knowledge and capability she'd spent 3 years accumulating in silence. The emergency klaxon shattered the pre-dawn quiet at 0427 hours, its harsh wail echoing across Naval Air Station Pensacola like a mechanical scream. Jessica bolted upright in her small apartment off base, instantly alert despite having worked until nearly midnight on critical system upgrades. The sound meant one thing: this wasn't a drill. She dressed quickly in her standard work clothes, dark jeans, steel-toed boots, and a plain navy polo shirt with her contractor identification badge. But as she drove through the base gates, Jessica immediately sensed that her routine day had just evaporated. Military police vehicles blocked several access roads, armed guards checked credentials with unusual thoroughness, and aircraft were being moved into defensive positions rather than training configurations. The maintenance hangar buzzed with controlled chaos. Jessica's workstation had been relocated to a secure area near the temporary command center, and her modified targeting computer sat connected to monitoring equipment she'd never seen before. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell stood nearby, coordinating with the special operations personnel who'd arrived the previous day. "Chun," Chief Rodriguez called out as she approached. "Emergency priority. We need your targeting system modifications implemented across 12 units by 1800 hours." Jessica blinked. 12 systems in 12 hours? That's physically impossible. With current, not impossible, interrupted a voice behind her. She turned to see the tall special operations officer she'd noticed yesterday. Up close, his insignia identified him as Commander Blake Harrison, though his unit designation remained obscured. Difficult, yes. Impossible, no. Not for someone with your capabilities. The way he said capabilities suggested knowledge that went beyond her official job description. Jessica felt exposed, as if 3 years of careful anonymity had suddenly become transparent. "Sir, I don't understand what 'walk with me,' Commander," Harrison said, leading her toward a briefing area that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell followed, along with 2 other officers Jessica didn't recognize. The briefing room contained tactical displays, showing real-time intelligence from multiple global locations. Jessica recognized several hot zones where American forces operated under constant threat from sophisticated adversaries. But what caught her attention were the technical readouts showing electronic warfare attacks against U.S. systems attacks that perfectly matched the damage patterns she'd analyzed in yesterday's targeting computer. "Miss Chun," Commander Harrison began, "what I'm about to share is classified at levels that require special authorization. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell has vouched for your discretion and technical competence. Are you prepared to accept temporary security clearance for this briefing?" Jessica's mind raced. Accepting would mean crossing a line she couldn't uncross, stepping into a world of secrets and responsibilities that extended far beyond electronics repair. But the alternative, remaining ignorant while colleagues potentially faced threats she could help address, felt like betrayal of everything her father had taught her about duty and capability. "Yes, sir." Mitchell activated a secure tablet and handed it to Jessica. The documents contained intelligence reports from 3 different operational theaters, all describing systematic failures of American targeting systems during critical missions. The electronic signatures were identical to what she'd reverse-engineered from the damaged unit on her workbench. "Hostile forces have developed countermeasures specifically designed to exploit vulnerabilities in our guidance systems," Harrison explained. "They're not just jamming our signals, they're turning our own technology against us. Aircraft are losing target acquisition at the worst possible moments. Lives are being lost." Jessica studied the technical data, recognizing patterns that confirmed her worst suspicions. This isn't random interference. Someone has detailed knowledge of our frequency protocols, signal timing, and system architecture. They've weaponized that information. Exactly. And your modifications yesterday created countermeasures that could neutralize these attacks. We need those improvements implemented immediately across systems scheduled for deployment within 48 hours. The scope of responsibility suddenly became clear. Jessica wasn't just repairing equipment. She was developing battlefield capabilities that could determine mission outcomes and save lives. The precision she'd cultivated over years of anonymous work had become strategically critical. "I'll need additional resources," she said, her mind already calculating requirements. "Specialized components that aren't in standard inventory, and direct access to the systems without going through normal requisition procedures." "Done," Harrison replied immediately. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it." This has presidential priority. Jessica spent the next hour examining the 12 targeting computers that had been delivered to her expanded workspace. Each unit represented different generations of technology, requiring customized approaches to implement her adaptive countermeasures. The task would have challenged an entire engineering team working under normal circumstances, but circumstances were anything but normal. As Jessica began disassembling the first unit, she could hear radio chatter from the command center, describing rapidly evolving situations overseas. American forces were encountering the same electronic warfare attacks in real time, and traditional countermeasures were proving inadequate. She worked with focused intensity, her hands moving through complex procedures while her mind processed multiple technical challenges simultaneously. The first system required complete reconfiguration of its signal processing architecture. The second needed hardware modifications that pushed components beyond their rated specifications. The third demanded creative solutions that didn't exist in any technical manual. By mid-morning, Jessica had completed modifications on 3 units and begun testing their performance against simulated attacks. The results were encouraging. Her adaptive algorithm successfully countered electronic interference that would have crippled standard systems. But 9 more units remained, and the deadline felt increasingly impossible. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell appeared at her workstation, carrying coffee and what looked like additional technical specifications. "How's progress?" "Ahead of my pessimistic estimates, behind my optimistic ones," Jessica replied without looking up from the delicate calibration work. "I can maintain my current pace for maybe 6 more hours before fatigue starts compromising precision." "What if you had assistance?" Jessica paused, considering the question. Her modifications required understanding that couldn't be quickly transferred to other technicians. "Not possible. These improvements aren't documented anywhere. They exist only in my head, and implementing them requires an intuitive understanding of electromagnetic principles that takes years to develop." Mitchell made notes on her tablet, then spoke quietly into a radio. Jessica caught fragments of the conversation, something about expanded timeline and alternative options, but remained focused on the complex circuit work that demanded her complete attention. The 4th targeting computer presented unprecedented challenges. Its architecture differed significantly from the others, requiring Jessica to essentially reverse engineer the entire system before implementing countermeasures. She found herself creating new circuit pathways that bypassed original design limitations, essentially building custom electronic warfare capabilities from components never intended for such purposes. As she worked, Jessica became aware of increased activity throughout the hangar. Additional personnel had arrived, bringing equipment she recognized as field-deployable testing systems. They were preparing to validate her modifications under conditions that simulated actual combat environments. The implications struck her with sudden force. These weren't just targeting computers. They were systems destined for aircraft that would face live fire within days or hours. Pilots would trust their lives to modifications she was implementing under emergency conditions, with no time for extensive testing or validation. The responsibility felt overwhelming, but Jessica pushed the anxiety aside and concentrated on the technical demands. Her precision had always been her anchor during stressful situations. Now that precision had to be perfect, because imperfection could mean death for people she'd never meet. but whose survival depended on her capabilities. By early afternoon, she'd completed 7 units and begun working on the 8th. Each modification represented improvements over the previous one. As Jessica refined her techniques and developed more efficient implementation methods, her hands worked automatically while her mind calculated increasingly complex solutions to electromagnetic interference problems. Commander Harrison returned as Jessica tested the 8th unit's performance against advanced attack simulations. The system not only resisted jamming attempts, but actually used the hostile signals to enhance its own targeting accuracy, a capability that hadn't existed in any American weapons system. "Outstanding work," Harrison said, studying the test results. "These modifications exceed our most optimistic projections." Jessica looked up from her workbench, realizing she'd been working for over 8 hours without significant breaks. Her back ached, her eyes burned from focusing on microscopic components, but her hands remained steady and her mind sharp. "4 more units to go," she said simply. "Actually, there's been a development." Harrison's expression grew serious. "Intelligence indicates that hostile electronic warfare capabilities are more advanced than we initially assessed. Your countermeasures are excellent, but we may need something beyond defensive modifications." Jessica frowned. "What do you mean?" "The attacks aren't just jamming our systems, they're attempting to hijack them. Take control of our own targeting computers and turn them against friendly forces. We need countermeasures that can not only resist such attacks but potentially trace them back to their sources." The technical challenges involved in such capabilities were staggering. Jessica would essentially need to build offensive electronic warfare systems disguised as defensive modifications, creating technology that could hunt and neutralize hostile signals while maintaining normal targeting functions. "That's exponentially more complex," she said carefully. "It would require complete system architecture redesign, not just component modifications." "Can it be done?" Jessica studied the remaining 4 targeting computers, her mind already analyzing the possibilities. What Harrison was describing pushed far beyond maintenance work into original research and development. She would be creating military capabilities that didn't exist anywhere else in the world. "Yes," she said finally, "but not in the remaining time frame, and not without accepting significant risks." "What kind of risks?" "The systems would be operating beyond all safety parameters. They might work perfectly, or they might fail catastrophically. There's no way to know without extensive testing that we don't have time for." Harrison exchanged glances with Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, then looked back at Jessica. "The alternative is sending our people into combat with systems that are already being systematically defeated. At least your modifications give them a fighting chance." Jessica nodded slowly, understanding that the decision had already been made. She would spend the next few hours creating technology that would either save American lives or potentially put them at greater risk. Either way, the responsibility was now entirely hers. She turned back to her workbench and began disassembling the 9th targeting computer. Her precision would have to be absolutely perfect, because there would be no second chances for the people who depended on what she was about to create. The fluorescent lights in the hangar cast harsh shadows as Jessica's hands trembled for the first time in 3 years of precision work. She'd been operating on adrenaline and determination for 14 straight hours, pushing her body and mind beyond sustainable limits. The 9th targeting computer lay partially disassembled before her, its complex innards exposed like a patient on an operating table. But this wasn't routine surgery. She was performing experimental procedures that could revolutionize electronic warfare or catastrophically fail when lives depended on them. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell approached with another cup of coffee, the 4th Jessica had accepted but barely touched. Steam rose from the ceramic mug, but Jessica's attention remained fixed on microscopic components that required steadier hands than her exhausted nervous system could provide. "Chun, you need to take a break," Mitchell said quietly. "You're operating beyond human limits." Jessica looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and strained. Around her, the maintenance hangar had transformed into something resembling a war room. Banks of monitoring equipment tracked her progress while communication stations maintained contact with operational theaters where American forces awaited the enhanced targeting systems. The weight of those expectations pressed down like physical force. 4 more hours, Jessica replied, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I can finish the remaining units in 4 more hours if my hands hold out. And if they don't?" The question hung in the air between them. Jessica's precision had always been her greatest asset, but precision required physical control that fatigue was steadily eroding. Her last several modifications had taken longer than the earlier ones, not because of increased complexity, but because she'd had to redo connections when her fingers betrayed her intentions. Commander Harrison materialized beside Mitchell, carrying a tablet displaying real-time intelligence updates. His expression was grim. "We have a problem. The electronic attacks overseas have intensified. 3 more aircraft lost targeting capability during critical missions. The enemy's jamming technology is adapting faster than we anticipated." Jessica studied the data flowing across Harrison's screen. The attack patterns had evolved since her initial analysis, incorporating countermeasures against standard defensive protocols. Whoever was orchestrating these electronic warfare campaigns possessed sophisticated understanding of American military systems and was continuously refining their approach. "They're learning from each engagement," she said, recognizing patterns that others might miss. "Every time our systems resist their attacks, they analyze the defensive responses and develop more effective countermeasures. It's like they're using our own adaptive capabilities against us." Harrison nodded grimly. "Which means your modifications might only provide temporary advantages. Once they encounter your countermeasures in the field, they'll start developing ways to defeat them too." The implication struck Jessica with sobering force. She wasn't just creating defensive improvements. She was entering an ongoing technological arms race where today's innovations would become tomorrow's vulnerabilities. The enemy's electronic warfare capabilities were dynamic, constantly evolving, which meant her solutions needed to be equally adaptive. "Then we need systems that can evolve faster than their countermeasures," Jessica said, her exhausted mind suddenly focused with laser intensity. "Not just passive defenses, but active learning algorithms that continuously modify their own responses based on hostile signal patterns." Mitchell and Harrison exchanged glances. What Jessica was describing pushed far beyond current military technology into theoretical concepts that existed only in advanced research laboratories. "Is that possible?" Harrison asked. Jessica stared at the partially modified targeting computer, her mind racing through possibilities that seemed to emerge from the intersection of exhaustion and inspiration. "Maybe, but it would require completely abandoning conventional approaches and implementing neural network architectures that don't exist in any military specification." Explain. "Instead of programming specific responses to anticipated threats, I'd create systems that learn from attack patterns and develop their own countermeasures autonomously. They'd essentially become intelligent opponents in the electronic warfare battle, adapting and counter-adapting in real time." The concept was audacious, potentially revolutionary, and far beyond anything Jessica had ever attempted. It would require her to essentially invent new categories of military technology while working under impossible time constraints with inadequate resources. Harrison studied her intently. "How long would such modifications take?" "Assuming I can solve theoretical problems that have stumped research teams for years. Assuming I can implement solutions using components never designed for such applications. Assuming my exhausted brain can perform at genius level for several more hours." Jessica paused, calculating possibilities that seemed increasingly unlikely. 8 to 10 hours, minimum. You've already been working for 14 hours straight, yes. And you're proposing to work another 10 hours on experimental technology that might not even function? Jessica looked around the hangar at the military personnel whose lives would depend on whatever she created. She thought about pilots flying into combat with systems that might fail at critical moments, about the electronic arms race that would continue regardless of her participation, about capabilities that could save American lives or potentially endanger them through untested innovations. "I'm proposing to try," she said quietly. The silence stretched for several seconds before Harrison spoke again. "What do you need?" "Access to processing components with capabilities beyond anything currently in inventory. Direct connection to the base's quantum computing research systems, and ... Jessica hesitated, knowing her next request would sound impossible. "I need someone who understands advanced signal processing theory well enough to verify my work as I implement it." Mitchell frowned. "We don't have anyone with those qualifications available on short notice." "Actually, we might," Harrison said slowly. "There's a Navy SEAL team conducting advanced training exercises 50 miles north of here. Their communications specialist has a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford and extensive experience with experimental electronic warfare systems." Jessica blinked. "A SEAL with a PhD? Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Cross, former professor, current operator. He's been developing field deployable countermeasures for special operations. If anyone could understand what you're proposing, it would be him." The idea of collaborating with someone from the elite special operations community seemed surreal. Jessica had spent 3 years in anonymous isolation, and now she was being offered partnership with personnel whose capabilities she could barely imagine. How soon could he get here? Harrison was already speaking into his radio, using terminology that suggested urgent priority communications. After a brief exchange, he looked back at Jessica. 2 hours. His team is being extracted from their current exercise and redirected here immediately. Jessica nodded, then turned back to her workbench. 2 hours would give her time to complete the current modification using conventional approaches, then begin planning the revolutionary changes she'd proposed. But first, she needed to address the immediate problem of her deteriorating physical condition. She stood up slowly, her back protesting after hours of hunched concentration, and walked to a nearby equipment locker. Inside, she found a small bottle of prescription stimulants that base medical personnel used for emergency situations requiring extended alertness. Jessica had never used such substances, but circumstances were far from normal. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell noticed her hesitation. "Those medications can help maintain focus, but they come with risks, especially when you're already exhausted." "What kind of risks?" "Increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure, potential for cardiac irregularities if you're already stressed. And when they wear off, the crash can be severe." Jessica considered the alternatives. She could continue working in her current state, accepting degraded performance that might compromise critical systems. She could stop and rest, knowing that delay might cost lives in active combat zones. Or she could accept pharmaceutical assistance that might enable peak performance, but carried significant personal risks. The decision felt symbolic of everything that had changed over the past day. Jessica had spent years avoiding risks, maintaining careful anonymity, protecting herself through invisibility. Now she was being asked to accept dangers she couldn't fully calculate in service of objectives that extended far beyond her personal safety. She took one of the stimulant tablets and swallowed it dry. "Noted for the record," Mitchell said quietly. Making entries on her tablet. "Medical consultation available if needed." Jessica returned to her workbench with renewed energy beginning to course through her system. The stimulant wouldn't solve the fundamental challenges she faced, but it might provide the mental clarity necessary to attempt solutions that seemed impossible under normal circumstances. As she resumed work on the ninth targeting computer, Jessica realized she had crossed another threshold. She was no longer just a contractor performing assigned tasks, but had become an active participant in military operations whose outcomes she couldn't predict or control. Her precision was now serving purposes that extended far beyond electronics. Repair into realms of strategic consequence, the targeting computer's components seemed to arrange themselves with new clarity as the stimulant took effect. Jessica's hands regained their steady precision, and her mind began processing technical challenges with renewed analytical intensity. She had committed herself to attempting the impossible, and failure was no longer an acceptable option. 2 hours until Master Chief Cross arrived. 8 to 10 hours of revolutionary work ahead. And somewhere in distant theaters of operation, American forces continued facing electronic warfare attacks that could potentially be countered by whatever Jessica managed to create in her exhausted, chemically enhanced, utterly determined state of mind. She had chosen to act beyond the breaking point, and now everything depended on whether her precision could transcend the normal limits of human capability. The invisible contractor had become the crucial factor in electronic warfare outcomes that could affect the balance of global military power. Jessica's hands moved with mechanical precision as her mind raced toward solutions that didn't yet exist. Driven by stimulants, determination, and the weight of responsibility that had transformed her from an anonymous technician into someone whose innovations might change the nature of modern warfare, the sound of rotors cutting through Florida air announced the arrival of Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Cross 2 hours and 17 minutes after Commander Harrison's call. Jessica looked up from her workstation as the helicopter settled onto the tarmac outside the hangar, its downdraft scattering loose papers and sending maintenance personnel scrambling to secure equipment. Through the massive hangar doors, she watched a figure emerge from the aircraft, tall, lean, moving with the controlled efficiency that marked elite military operators. But what struck Jessica immediately was the way he carried himself. This wasn't the swagger of someone trying to project authority, but the quiet confidence of a person who had nothing to prove because his capabilities spoke for themselves. Master Chief Cross approached the command area where Harrison and Mitchell waited, but his eyes were already scanning the technical setup with obvious professional interest. Even from a distance, Jessica could see him processing the complexity of what they'd assembled: the modified targeting computers, the testing equipment, the improvised research environment that had grown organically around her workstation. "Chun," Harrison called out, "come meet your new partner." Jessica set down the microscopic components she'd been calibrating and walked toward the group, acutely aware that she looked like someone who'd been awake for 18 hours straight. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her polo shirt was stained with flux residue, and she suspected the stimulants had given her eyes an intensity that might seem unsettling. Master Chief Cross turned as she approached, and Jessica found herself face to face with someone whose presence immediately commanded attention. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair, alert hazel eyes, and the kind of weathered features that suggested extensive outdoor operations. But what surprised her most was the genuine curiosity in his expression as he studied her workstation setup. "Miss Chun," he said, extending his hand with a firm grip that conveyed respect rather than dominance. "Daniel Cross, I understand you've been performing some impressive electronic warfare innovations under challenging circumstances." His voice carried the slight accent of someone from the Pacific Northwest, and Jessica noticed that his handshake lasted exactly the appropriate duration, long enough to convey sincerity, brief enough to maintain professionalism. Everything about his demeanor suggested someone accustomed to working with diverse specialists under high-pressure conditions. "I've been trying to stay ahead of adaptive jamming systems," Jessica replied carefully. "With mixed success." Cross smiled, not the patronizing expression she'd learned to expect from military personnel, but genuine appreciation for technical understatement. Commander Harrison briefed me on your neural network proposal during the flight. Autonomous countermeasure development using machine learning algorithms implemented in real-time battlefield systems. Ambitious doesn't begin to describe it. Jessica felt a flutter of uncertainty. Describing her ideas to exhausted commanders was different from explaining them to someone with advanced technical credentials who could immediately identify flaws in her reasoning. It's theoretical at this point, she said. I'm not even sure the processing requirements can be met with current hardware limitations. Let me see what you've built so far. Jessica led Cross to her workstation, where the 10 completed targeting. Computers sat connected to monitoring equipment, displaying their performance characteristics. She powered up the most recent modification and ran it through attack simulations that had defeated standard military systems. Cross watched the diagnostic readouts with obvious fascination, occasionally asking questions that revealed deep understanding of electronic warfare principles. When the system not only resisted jamming attempts but used the hostile signals to enhance its own accuracy, he whistled softly. This is elegant work, he said, studying the circuit modifications Jessica had implemented. You've essentially created electronic immune systems that get stronger when attacked. How did you develop the adaptive algorithms? Trial and error, mostly. I analyzed failure patterns from combat reports and reverse-engineered the attack methodologies. Then developed countermeasures that could recognize and neutralize similar threats automatically. Cross nodded slowly, then surprised Jessica by asking, "What's your background in machine learning theory?" "I don't have one," Jessica admitted. "I'm self-taught in electronics, working from principles my father showed me and technical manuals I've studied independently." The silence that followed felt uncomfortable until Cross spoke again. "That explains why your approach is so innovative. You're not constrained by conventional academic frameworks. You're solving problems through pure engineering intuition." "Lieutenant." Commander Mitchell stepped forward. "Master Chief, we need to know if Miss Chun's neural network proposal is feasible given current time constraints and available resources." Cross studied the remaining 2 unmodified targeting computers, then looked at Jessica with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "Show me what you're planning." Jessica opened her notebook and began sketching the theoretical architecture she'd conceived during the stimulant-enhanced clarity of the past few hours. The diagram showed processing pathways that could analyze hostile signals, identify attack patterns, and develop countermeasures without human intervention, essentially creating artificial intelligence specifically designed for electronic warfare. The system would need to operate in 3 phases, she explained, her exhaustion temporarily forgotten as she described the technical challenges. First, pattern recognition algorithms that can identify hostile signals within microseconds of initial contact. Second, threat assessment protocols that evaluate attack characteristics and predict likely escalation patterns. Third, countermeasure generation that creates and implements defensive responses faster than human operators could conceive them. Cross studied her diagrams with increasing intensity, occasionally making notes on his own tablet. When Jessica finished her explanation, he looked up with an expression that combined admiration and concern. "The theoretical framework is sound," he said finally. "More than sound, it's brilliant. But implementing it would require processing capabilities that don't exist in any portable military system." Jessica's heart sank. She'd suspected the hardware limitations might prove insurmountable, but hearing confirmation from someone with Cross's credentials felt like watching months of theoretical work collapse. "However," Cross continued, "there might be alternatives. The base's quantum computing research facility has experimental processors that could handle the computational load. They're not field deployable, but we could potentially create hybrid Systems that leverage remote processing power through secure communication links. Commander Harrison stepped forward. Explain. The targeting computers would maintain their standard functions while also serving as data collection nodes. Cross said, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. They'd gather signal intelligence from hostile electronic warfare attacks and transmit that data to the quantum processors for analysis. The quantum systems would develop countermeasures and transmit them back to the field units within seconds. Jessica stared at him, recognizing the elegant solution he'd proposed. A distributed intelligence network. The individual targeting systems become nodes in a larger electronic warfare brain that learns from every engagement across all feeders simultaneously. Exactly. Each attack against any American system would immediately inform countermeasures available to all American systems. The enemy's adaptive capabilities would become their weakness because every adaptation would be instantly countered across the entire network. The implications were staggering. What Cross was describing would revolutionize electronic warfare by creating the first truly intelligent military network, a system that could learn, adapt, and evolve faster than any human-directed countermeasures. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was already speaking into her radio, using terminology that suggested direct communication with the Pentagon. The quantum computing facility would need immediate authorization for military applications that pushed far beyond its research mandate. How long will it take? Harrison asked. Cross looked at Jessica, recognizing that the technical implementation would depend entirely on her capabilities. Quantum processing integration is straightforward from my end. The challenge is modifying the targeting computers to serve as network nodes while maintaining their primary functions. Jessica studied the two remaining unmodified units, her mind already visualizing the circuit changes that would be required. The work would be even more complex than her previous modifications, requiring her to essentially build network communication capabilities into systems never designed for such applications. 6 hours, she said quietly. Maybe 8 if I encounter unexpected compatibility issues. You've been working for 18 hours already, Mitchell pointed out. Are you physically capable of continuing at the precision level this work demands? Jessica considered the question honestly. The stimulants had restored her mental clarity, but her hands were beginning to show subtle tremors that could compromise microscopic circuit work. Her back ached from hunched concentration, and her eyes burned from focusing on components smaller than pencil tips. But she was also aware that somewhere in active combat zones, American personnel were facing electronic warfare attacks that could be countered by the system she was capable of creating. The balance between personal limitations and strategic necessity had shifted decisively toward accepting risks she would normally avoid. I can do it, she said. Cross studied her intently, and Jessica had the distinct impression he was evaluating her the same way he might assess a teammate before a dangerous mission. Whatever he saw in her expression apparently satisfied him because he nodded once. Then let's get started. I'll handle the quantum system integration while you modify the targeting computers. We'll work in parallel and integrate our systems when both components are ready. What followed was the most intense technical collaboration of Jessica's life. Cross proved to be not just knowledgeable, but genuinely gifted at understanding complex systems and identifying elegant solutions to seemingly impossible problems. He worked with the same precise efficiency Jessica had always tried to emulate, but with the added dimension of someone accustomed to performing under life-threatening pressure. As Jessica began disassembling the 11th targeting computer, she found herself explaining her modification techniques to someone who could not only understand them, but suggest improvements based on his own experience with field-deployed electronic warfare systems. Their collaboration developed a natural rhythm, Jessica focusing on microscopic circuit work while Cross handled the broader system architecture that would connect her creations to the quantum processing network. The work was exhausting, demanding, and unlike anything either of them had attempted before. But as the hours passed, Jessica realized she was witnessing the creation of military technology that could fundamentally change the balance of global electronic warfare capabilities. Her precision, enhanced by Cross's strategic understanding and supported by quantum computing power, was producing innovations that neither of them could have achieved independently. The invisible contractor and the elite operator had become partners in developing capabilities that would either revolutionize American military effectiveness or fail spectacularly when lives depended on their untested creations. By the time Jessica completed modifications on the final targeting computer, she and Cross had created something unprecedented, a distributed electronic warfare intelligence network that could learn from attacks and develop countermeasures faster than any enemy could adapt to them. The question that remained was whether their revolutionary system would perform as designed when faced with real-world combat conditions that no simulation could fully replicate. The secure communication terminal crackled to life at 0347 hours, its encrypted transmission carrying news that would validate 26 hours of exhausting innovation. Jessica looked up from her final calibration sequence as Commander Harrison answered the call, his expression transforming from cautious optimism to something approaching amazement as he processed the incoming intelligence. "Shun, Cross, you need to hear this immediately," Harrison called out. Activating the hangar's secure audio system, the voice that emerged belonged to Colonel Sarah Martinez, coordinating electronic warfare operations from a classified location in the Middle East. Her words carried the weight of real-world battlefield results that Jessica and Master Chief Cross had been working toward through their marathon technical session. "Pensacola Base, this is Blackhawk Control. Initial deployment of the modified targeting systems has exceeded all performance projections. 3 separate engagement scenarios where previous systems had failed completely. Your enhanced units not only maintained target acquisition through hostile jamming, but actually improved accuracy during electronic attacks." Jessica felt her knees weaken slightly, whether from exhaustion or relief she couldn't determine. The experimental modifications she'd implemented while running on stimulants and determination had actually worked under combat conditions that no simulation could fully replicate. "Specific performance data follows," Colonel Martinez continued. "Strike Package Alpha encountered the same electronic warfare signature that had defeated targeting systems in previous operations. The modified units not only resisted jamming, but used the hostile signals to enhance their own precision targeting. Mission successful with 0 collateral damage." Master Chief Cross caught Jessica's arm as she swayed slightly, the combination of physical exhaustion and emotional relief threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. She'd been operating on pure willpower for hours, and the confirmation that her work had saved lives in actual combat finally allowed some of that tension to release. Strike Package Bravo faced coordinated electronic attacks from multiple directions, the intelligence report continued. Standard countermeasures would have been completely defeated. Your distributed network implementation allowed the targeting systems to coordinate defensive responses automatically. Not only did they maintain functionality, but they transmitted attack pattern data that enabled other units to preemptively counter similar threats. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell approached Jessica with a chair, recognizing that 26 hours of continuous work was approaching the absolute limits of human endurance. Jessica sat gratefully, though her mind remained focused on the technical implications of what they were hearing. "Most significantly," Colonel Martinez concluded, "the quantum-enhanced learning algorithms have begun developing countermeasures that our enemy has never encountered. We're seeing electronic warfare capabilities that didn't exist 48 hours ago, created autonomously by systems that are adapting faster than hostile forces can respond." The communication ended, leaving the hangar in profound silence. Jessica stared at the 12 modified targeting computers that had seemed like impossible technical challenges just hours earlier. Now they represented the foundation of a revolutionary military capability that was already changing combat outcomes in active theaters of Operation. Commander Harrison broke the silence. Miss Chun, I need you to understand what you've accomplished. You've created electronic warfare technology that represents a generational leap beyond anything in our current arsenal. Systems that learn, adapt, and evolve in real time during combat operations. Jessica nodded slowly, still processing the enormity of what had transpired. The network effect was theoretical until now. Knowing that it actually works under battlefield conditions changes everything. Cross finished. You've essentially created the first truly intelligent military network. Every engagement makes it smarter. Every attack teaches it new defensive capabilities. The implications extended far beyond individual targeting computers. Jessica's distributed intelligence concept could potentially be applied to radar systems, communication networks, missile defense installations, and virtually any military technology vulnerable to electronic warfare attacks. She had inadvertently pioneered an entirely new category of adaptive military systems. There's more, Harrison said, consulting his tablet. Pentagon wants a full technical briefing within 6 hours. They're considering immediate implementation across all electronic warfare systems in active deployment zones. Jessica blinked. All systems? That would require hundreds of modifications implemented under field conditions, coordinated across multiple theaters of operation simultaneously, Cross said. It's logistically challenging, but the performance advantages are too significant to ignore. The scope of responsibility suddenly expanded beyond anything Jessica had contemplated. Her experimental modifications, created in a single hangar-over one exhausting day, were becoming the foundation for America's electronic warfare strategy across global military operations. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell approached with official documentation that Jessica recognized as security clearance forms. The Pentagon is offering you immediate civilian contractor status with special access authorization. Full benefits, security clearance appropriate for the technology you've developed, and compensation commensurate with the strategic value of your innovations. Jessica studied the documents, recognizing that accepting would fundamentally change her life in ways she couldn't fully predict. Her anonymous existence as an invisible technician would end permanently, replaced by responsibilities and visibility that she'd spent years avoiding. What does this mean practically? She asked. It means you become the primary technical specialist for implementing your distributed intelligence concept across the entire military electronic warfare infrastructure, Harrison explained. You'd work directly with special operations teams, coordinate with Pentagon research divisions, and probably spend significant time in classified facilities that don't officially exist. Cross leaned forward. It also means you'd have resources and support that most researchers can only dream about. Unlimited access to advanced technology, collaboration with the best minds in military science, and the ability to continue developing innovations that could save American lives worldwide. Jessica considered the offer carefully. Accepting would mean abandoning the quiet life she'd built for herself and her family, stepping into a world of secrets and responsibilities that would demand capabilities she'd never been asked to demonstrate. But refusing might mean watching other technicians struggle to implement her concepts without the intuitive understanding necessary for optimal results. My father's medical care, she said quietly. My family's financial situation. Fully covered. Mitchell replied immediately. Medical benefits include comprehensive care for family members, relocation assistance if needed, and compensation that would eliminate financial concerns. The practical obstacles that had driven Jessica's career choices for years were suddenly being removed. The economic pressures that had forced her into anonymous technical work would no longer constrain her options or limit her potential contributions. But more important than financial considerations was the recognition that her capabilities had found their proper application. For 3 years, she'd performed routine maintenance work while possessing knowledge and intuition that could contribute to strategic military objectives. Now she was being offered the opportunity to apply those abilities where they could have maximum impact. "There's something else you should know," Cross said, his expression becoming more serious. "The electronic warfare arms race you've entered doesn't end with defensive countermeasures. Our enemies will analyze your innovations and develop new attack methodologies specifically designed to defeat them. This is an ongoing technological competition that will require continuous innovation under pressure." Jessica understood the implications. Accepting this position would mean committing to an indefinite struggle against adversaries who possessed sophisticated capabilities and unlimited motivation to overcome American technological advantages. Her innovations would be studied, reverse-engineered, and countered, requiring her to stay ahead of opponents who were equally dedicated to electronic warfare supremacy. "How long do you estimate before hostile forces develop countermeasures against the current modifications?" she asked. Cross and Harrison exchanged glances before Cross answered. "Based on historical patterns, anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. But that assumes they can understand how your systems work, which may prove more difficult than previous reverse engineering efforts." "Why?" "Because your approach is fundamentally different from conventional electronic warfare systems. You've created technology that evolves autonomously, which means even you can't predict exactly how it will develop over time. Reverse engineering a system that changes its own architecture continuously presents challenges that may be insurmountable." Jessica realized that her exhaustion-induced innovations had created something more sophisticated than she'd originally intended. The distributed intelligence network wasn't just adaptive, it was genuinely creative, capable of developing solutions that no human engineer had conceived. The weight of that responsibility was staggering, but it was also exhilarating. Jessica had spent her life working with technology that followed predictable rules and produced expected results. Now she had created systems that surprised even her with their capabilities and potential. "I need to know," she said finally, "that the technology will be used responsibly, that the capabilities I'm creating will serve defensive purposes rather than offensive aggression." Commander Harrison nodded. "You would have input into implementation policies and operational parameters. Your security clearance would include oversight responsibilities for ensuring appropriate use of the systems you develop." The offer represented everything Jessica had never allowed herself to hope for: recognition for her capabilities, resources to pursue innovations that fascinated her, and the opportunity to contribute to objectives that extended far beyond personal advancement. But it also meant accepting visibility and responsibility that would fundamentally change her relationship with the world. Jessica looked at the modified targeting computers that had started this transformation, then at Master Chief Cross, who had become her partner in creating revolutionary military technology. Finally, she met Commander Harrison's expectant gaze. "I accept," she said quietly. The hangar erupted in activity as personnel began implementing security protocols and communication procedures necessary for Jessica's new status. But in the midst of organizational chaos, Cross approached her with something that looked like a small wooden box. "Before you get swept up in Pentagon briefings and classified projects," he said, "I wanted to give you something." Jessica opened the box to find a Navy SEAL Trident pin, identical to the ones worn by members of the most elite military units in the world. But this one bore a small engraving that read, "Precision Under Pressure, DC." "You've earned this," Cross said seriously. "Not because of what's on your chest, but because of what's in your mind and heart. You've demonstrated capabilities under pressure that most operators never achieve." Jessica held the pin carefully, understanding that it represented recognition from someone whose respect was earned through demonstrated competence rather than formal credentials. For the first time in her life, her precision had been acknowledged by someone who truly understood its value. As she pinned the trident to her contractor's polo shirt, Jessica realized that she was no longer invisible. Her precision had become legend. Her innovations had changed the course of electronic warfare, and her future would be defined by capabilities that she was only beginning to understand. The anonymous technician had become a strategic military asset, and there was no going back to the comfortable anonymity she'd once treasured. 6 months later, Jessica Chun stood in the Pentagon's most classified briefing room, addressing a joint assembly of military commanders, intelligence officials, and defense contractors whose combined security clearances represented the highest levels of American strategic planning. The woman who had once been invisible was now the focal point of discussions that would shape the future of electronic warfare for decades to come. The distributed intelligence network has exceeded all performance projections, she reported to the assembled officials, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had replaced her former anonymity. We're now seeing autonomous countermeasure development that anticipates enemy electronic warfare tactics before they're deployed in the field. Admiral Rebecca Thompson, Chief of Naval Operations, leaned forward with obvious interest. Explain the predictive capabilities. Jessica activated a holographic display showing global electronic warfare patterns that her systems had been tracking and analyzing. The network has identified preparation signatures that precede major electronic attacks. Enemy forces appear to conduct testing and calibration procedures that create detectable electromagnetic signatures. Our systems now recognize these patterns and pre-position countermeasures before attacks are actually launched. The implications were staggering. Jessica's innovations had evolved beyond reactive defense into proactive electronic warfare capabilities that could neutralize threats before they materialized. American military systems were now protected by artificial intelligence that thought faster and more comprehensively than any human operator. Commander Harrison, who had been promoted to Pentagon liaison for advanced electronic warfare systems, spoke from his position at the conference table. Miss Chun, or rather Dr. Chun, he corrected himself, acknowledging the honorary doctorate that MIT had awarded her for contributions to military technology. What are the long-term strategic implications of these developments? Jessica smiled at the formal title, remembering when her name had been unknown to anyone beyond her immediate supervisors. The network is approaching technological singularity in electronic warfare applications. It's developing capabilities that even I can't fully predict or control. We're essentially witnessing the birth of artificial intelligence that specializes in military applications. The room fell silent as officials contemplated the consequences of creating autonomous military intelligence that operated beyond human oversight. Jessica's precision had evolved into something that transcended individual capability, becoming a strategic asset that could potentially reshape global military balance. Current deployment status? Asked General Patricia Martinez, whose forces had been among the first to benefit from Jessica's innovations. Operational across all major theaters, with performance optimization continuing autonomously, Jessica replied. The systems are now teaching themselves countermeasures that our enemies haven't even conceived yet. We're staying ahead of threats that don't currently exist. Master Chief Cross, now serving as liaison between Special Operations and the Electronic Warfare Development Program, addressed the strategic concerns. The technology has proven invaluable in the field. Mission success rates have improved dramatically, and casualty rates from electronic warfare attacks have dropped to near zero. Jessica caught Cross's eye across the room, remembering their marathon collaboration that had started this transformation. They had become partners in developing technology that was reshaping modern warfare, though their relationship remained professional despite mutual respect that had grown through shared challenges. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, now promoted to captain and overseeing the implementation program, provided operational updates. Training protocols have been established for field personnel, though the systems largely operate independently. Jessica's innovations have essentially made electronic warfare expertise accessible to operators without specialized technical backgrounds. The meeting continued for another hour, covering classified developments that push the boundaries of current technology. Jessica answered technical questions with the same precision she had once applied to circuit repairs, but now her knowledge influenced strategic decisions that affected global military operations. When the briefing concluded, Jessica found herself walking through Pentagon corridors that had once seemed impossibly distant from her maintenance hangar workstation. Security personnel nodded respectfully as she passed, recognizing someone whose innovations had become legendary within classified military circles. Admiral Thompson fell into step beside her as they approached the secure elevator that would take Jessica to her private laboratory. "Dr. Chun, I wanted to personally acknowledge what you've accomplished. Your work has given American forces technological advantages that may prove decisive in conflicts we haven't even anticipated." Jessica nodded acknowledgement, though part of her mind remained focused on the technical challenges waiting in her laboratory. "Thank you, Admiral. But the technology is still evolving. I suspect we've only seen the beginning of what's possible. And that doesn't concern you? Creating military intelligence that operates beyond human control?" Jessica considered the question carefully. "All technology carries risks, Admiral. But the alternative, allowing our enemies to gain electronic warfare superiority, represents far greater dangers. My precision-created defensive capabilities. How they're used remains a human decision." The elevator arrived, and Jessica stepped inside, her reflection multiplied in the polished steel walls. She was no longer the invisible contractor who had once stared at her fading image in linoleum floors. The woman looking back at her wore the uniform of a civilian defense specialist, carried security credentials that granted access to America's most classified programs, and possessed knowledge that made her indispensable to national security planning. As the elevator descended toward her laboratory, Jessica thought about the journey that had brought her here. 3 years of anonymous precision work had culminated in a single day when circumstances demanded capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. Her willingness to step beyond comfortable invisibility had transformed not just her own life, but potentially the entire landscape of modern military technology. The laboratory doors opened to reveal workstations equipped with quantum computing systems, experimental electronics that push the boundaries of current science, and communication links to field operations worldwide. This was where Jessica's precision continued to evolve, creating innovations that stayed ahead of adversaries who never stopped developing new threats. She was no longer just working on her precision, she had become precision itself, a human embodiment of technological capability that bridged the gap between theoretical possibility and practical military application. The invisible contractor had become a strategic asset whose innovations would influence conflicts for generations to come. Jessica Chun had entered the Pentagon through service doors as an anonymous technician. Now she walked through the front entrance as someone whose name was spoken with respect in the highest levels of American military command. Her precision had become legend, and legends never fade back into invisibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.